The forgotten weapons of World War II were stranger than anything Hollywood could invent, built in secret, tested in desperation, and used when nothing else would work. These inventions saved lives, changed battles, and pushed the limits of what was possible in ways you will not believe. The Japanese balloon bombs were silent killers that floated across the Pacific Ocean on jet stream winds, carrying explosives meant to ignite forest fires and spread terror across the American mainland. Launched from Japan starting in late 1944, these paper and rubberized silk balloons rose to altitudes of 30,000 feet, drifted for 3 days, and released their payloads over Oregon, Washington, and even as far inland as Michigan. Each balloon carried incendiary devices or high-explosive bombs designed to drop automatically using a clever system of sandbags and altitude sensors. Nearly 9,000 of these few-go balloons were launched, and while most fell harmlessly into the ocean or remote wilderness, at least 300 reached North America. The American government kept them secret to avoid panic and prevent the Japanese from knowing if their weapon was working. Tragically, 6 people died in Oregon when a family stumbled upon an unexploded balloon during a church picnic in 1945. After the war, the program was deemed a failure and quickly forgotten, though fragments still turn up today. The Nazi sound cannons were born from the terrifying idea that sound itself could be weaponized to kill or incapacitate enemy soldiers without firing a single bullet. German scientists during World War II experimented with massive parabolic reflectors that could focus sound waves into a concentrated beam, theoretically capable of destroying aircraft or stopping infantry in their tracks. The device used explosive charges detonated inside large curved mirrors to create focused shockwaves strong enough to rupture organs or cause instant death at close range. Engineers tested prototypes that stood several meters tall and required careful positioning to aim the acoustic blast at targets. In theory, soldiers caught in the beam would suffer from dizziness, nausea, or internal injuries from the intense pressure waves. However, the weapon proved impractical because it was bulky, slow to reposition, required enormous energy, and had very limited range. The war ended before it could be perfected, and the concept faded into obscurity as another desperate experiment. The Biat bombs were one of the strangest and most ambitious plans the United States military ever devised to bring Japan to its knees without a full-scale invasion. Proposed by a Pennsylvania dentist named Lytle Adams in 1942, the idea was deceptively simple yet wildly audacious. Thousands of Mexican free-tailed bats would be captured, fitted with tiny incendiary devices strapped to their chests, placed into hibernation, and then dropped from bombers over Japanese cities at dawn. As the bats woke up and sought shelter in the wooden attics and eaves of buildings across urban areas, timed fuses would ignite the bombs, sparking massive fires that would spread faster than firefighters could control. The military took the idea seriously enough to spend 2 years and $2 million testing it. During trials, escaped bats accidentally set fire to a military hangar and a general's car. The project was eventually shelved in favor of the atomic bomb. The Panjandrum was Britain's answer to the problem of breaching heavily fortified German coastal defenses, and it looked like something out of a fever dream. Imagine 2 enormous 10-foot wooden wheels connected by a solid axle, with the entire outer rim packed with rockets that would propel this massive contraption forward at high speed. The plan was to aim it at concrete bunkers and beach obstacles, let the rockets ignite, and watch it roll straight into enemy fortifications before detonating its payload of explosives. Tested on British beaches in 1943 and 1944, the Panjandrum was supposed to be the ultimate breakthrough weapon. Instead, it became a spectacular failure. During demonstrations, rockets misfired and flew off in random directions, sending military observers diving for cover. The wheel wobbled unpredictably, veered off course, and once even chased a group of watching generals down the beach. It was terrifying to everyone except the enemy. The project was quietly abandoned. The Goliath tracked mine was Germany's attempt to create a remote-controlled bomb on wheels that could crawl under enemy tanks and blow them to pieces. Small enough to hide behind debris and low enough to able to slip beneath vehicles, this miniature tank measured just 4 feet long and 1 foot tall. It was steered using a long electrical cable that connected it to an operator hidden safely behind cover. Once positioned under or near a target, the operator would detonate the 130 pounds of explosives packed inside. The Goliath was used on the beaches of Normandy, in urban warfare, and against fortified positions throughout the war. However, it had serious flaws. The control cable was fragile and easily cut by gunfire or tank treads. The device moved slowly, making it an easy target for alert soldiers. Its thin armor offered no protection against small arms fire. Despite producing over 7,500 units, the Goliath proved more expensive and less effective than anticipated, and it faded from use after the war. The pigeon-guided missiles were the brainchild of American behaviorist B.F. Skinner, who believed that trained pigeons could guide bombs more accurately than any mechanical system available during World War II. The concept, called Project Pigeon, involved placing live pigeons inside the nose cone of a glide bomb. The birds were trained to peck at an image of the target displayed on a screen in front of them. Their pecks sent electronic signals that adjusted the bomb's flight path, steering it directly toward ships, buildings, or other high-value targets. Skinner spent years conditioning pigeons to recognize enemy vessels and structures, and the birds performed remarkably well in tests. The military funded the research, but remained deeply skeptical. Decision-makers struggled to trust the lives of pilots and the success of missions to birds, no matter how well trained. By the time reliable electronic guidance systems were developed, Project Pigeon was discontinued and largely forgotten as a strange wartime footnote. The sticky bombs were handheld anti-tank grenades designed to do exactly what the name suggests. They stuck to enemy armor and then exploded. Officially called the No. 74 grenade, this British weapon featured a glass sphere filled with nitroglycerin covered in a strong adhesive and encased in a metal shell with a handle. A soldier would remove the outer casing, exposing the sticky surface, rush toward a tank, slap the bomb onto its hull, pull the pin to activate a 5-second fuse, and then run for cover before it detonated. The idea was clever, but the execution was deeply flawed. The adhesive sometimes stuck to the wrong things, including the soldier's uniform, hands, or equipment. In cold or dusty conditions, the glue often failed to stick at all. The glass sphere was fragile and dangerous to carry, especially in combat. Soldiers disliked them, and many preferred standard grenades or anti-tank rifles. Despite being issued in large numbers, sticky bombs saw limited use and quickly disappeared from arsenals after the war. The Welrod pistol was the ultimate tool for silent killing, designed specifically for British commandos and special operations agents who needed to eliminate enemy guards without making a sound. Unlike other suppressed weapons, the Welrod was built from the ground up to be completely silent. It featured an integrated suppressor as long as the barrel itself, used subsonic ammunition that never broke the sound barrier, and operated with a manual bolt action to avoid any noise from moving parts. When fired, the only sound was a soft click. A faint mechanical click, quieter than a cough. Agents carried it during covert missions behind enemy lines, assassinations, and sabotage operations throughout occupied Europe. The weapon was so effective that it remained classified for decades after the war. It fired a heavy-caliber round at close range, usually pressed directly against the target. Compact and reliable, the Welrod embodied the silent lethality required for clandestine warfare. Few were ever produced, and even fewer survive today. The railway guns were the largest artillery pieces ever built, so enormous that they could only be moved on reinforced train tracks and required entire crews to operate. Germany led the way with monsters like the Schwerer Gustav and Dora, guns that weighed over 1,300 tons, stood several stories tall, and fired shells weighing up to 7 tons across distances of nearly 30 miles. These behemoths were designed to destroy heavily fortified bunkers, coastal defenses, and entire city blocks with a single shot. Moving them required specially built rail lines, and setting them up was a massive undertaking. Setting them up took weeks of preparation. During the siege of Sevastopol in 1942, the Germans used railway guns to pound Soviet fortifications into rubble. However, their size made them vulnerable to air attacks, and their lack of mobility meant they could not respond to fast-moving battles. After the war, most were scrapped or destroyed. The few that survived became museum pieces, relics of an era when bigger truly seemed better. The FP-45 Liberator was a single-shot pistol so cheap and simple that it cost less than $3 to produce, and it was never meant to win battles. Instead, it was designed to be airdropped by the thousands into occupied Europe, where resistance fighters could use it for one purpose: to kill an enemy soldier and take his rifle. The pistol was stamped from sheet metal, had no moving parts beyond the trigger and firing pin, and came with 10 rounds of ammunition stored in the grip. It was smoothbore, inaccurate beyond a few feet, and required manual reloading after every shot, using a wooden dowel to eject the spent casing. Over 1 million Liberator pistols were manufactured in 1942. They were packed in boxes with illustrated instructions because many resistance fighters were illiterate. However, most were never distributed due to concerns about their effectiveness and fear they might fall into the wrong hands. The majority sat in warehouses and were eventually destroyed after the war. The sword canes and commando daggers were the hidden blades carried by elite soldiers and intelligence operatives who needed a weapon that could kill silently and disappear just as quickly. Sword canes looked like ordinary walking sticks, but concealed razor-sharp blades that could be drawn in an instant. British commandos and intelligence agents used them during covert missions in occupied territories, where carrying visible weapons would blow their cover. The Fairbairn-Sykes commando dagger became iconic, a sleek, double-edged blade designed specifically for silent kills. Its thin profile allowed it to slip between ribs with minimal resistance, and its needle-like point made it deadly in close combat. Soldiers trained extensively in knife-fighting techniques, learning to use these blades for quick, silent neutralizations. They were used to strike from behind or during hand-to-hand struggles. These weapons were personal, brutal, and effective in ways that guns could never be. After the war, many were kept as souvenirs or destroyed. Though some still surface in estate sales and military collections, silent reminders of close-quarters warfare. Hedy Lamarr's torpedo guidance system was the secret invention of a Hollywood movie star who also happened to be a brilliant self-taught engineer. While most knew her as a glamorous actress, Lamarr spent her evenings working on a frequency-hopping technology that would prevent enemy forces from jamming radio-controlled torpedoes. She partnered with composer George Antheil, and together they patented a system that rapidly switched between radio frequencies, making it nearly impossible to intercept or block. The United States Navy initially dismissed the idea, partly because they could not take a film star seriously as an inventor. The technology sat unused during the war, but decades later it became the foundation for modern Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and GPS systems. Lamarr received recognition decades later. Hedy Lamarr received no money or recognition during her lifetime for the invention that changed the world. It was only in her final years that the tech industry acknowledged her contributions. Her frequency hopping system remains one of the most important yet forgotten innovations of World War II. Flamethrower tanks were rolling nightmares, combining armor protection with the ability to shoot streams of burning fuel over 100 yards, incinerating everything in their path. The British Churchill Crocodile was the most famous. It towed a trailer filled with 400 gallons of flame fuel behind it, while maintaining a fully functional main gun. When the crew activated the flamethrower, a jet of fire erupted from a nozzle mounted where the Hull machine gun used to be, turning bunkers, trenches, and fortified positions into infernos within seconds. The psychological impact was immense. Enemy soldiers often surrendered the moment they saw a crocodile approaching, rather than face being burned alive. These tanks were used during the Normandy invasion and throughout the liberation of. Flamethrower tanks operated in Europe, clearing out stubborn defensive positions that conventional weapons could not touch. However, the flamethrowers' limited range and the danger of carrying highly flammable fuel made crews vulnerable. After the war, most flamethrower tanks were retired as too specialized and horrifying for peacetime militaries. The explosives disguised as rats were some of the most creative and disturbing sabotage devices ever created by British intelligence during World War II. Agents from the Special Operations Executive took real dead rats, hollowed out their bodies, stuffed them with plastic explosives, and sewed them back up to look completely natural. The plan was to plant these explosive rats in German factories, shipyards, and coal stores, where workers would likely toss them into boilers or furnaces without a second thought. Once inside the fire, the explosives would detonate, causing massive damage and confusion. Ironically, the Germans discovered a shipment of these rat bombs before they could be widely used, but the discovery caused even more disruption than the explosions would have. German forces became paranoid, inspecting every dead rat they found and wasting countless hours searching for more booby-trapped rodents. The fear and distraction were so effective that the British considered the operation a success, even without a single detonation. The rat bombs became a legend in the world of covert warfare. The underwater aircraft carriers were Japan's desperate attempt to strike directly at the American mainland using submarine-launched bombers. The I-400 class submarines were the largest ever built during World War II, stretching over 400 feet long and capable of traveling 1.5 times around the world without refueling. Each submarine carried 3 Saran float planes stored in a watertight hangar built into the hull. The planes could be assembled, fueled, and launched from a catapult on the submarine's deck in under 30 minutes. Japan planned to use these aircraft to bomb the Panama Canal, West Coast cities, and other strategic targets. However, the concept was complex, expensive, and slow to deploy. Only 3 of them were completed. These submarines were completed before the war ended, and none saw combat as intended. American forces captured them after Japan's surrender, studied the technology extensively, and then scuttled them to prevent the Soviet Union from accessing the designs. The underwater aircraft carriers remain one of the most forgotten naval innovations. The rocket-assisted takeoff bottles were disposable jet boosters, strapped to aircraft to help them get airborne from short runways or aircraft carriers when heavily loaded with fuel and bombs. These solid fuel rockets, often called JATO units, provided a sudden burst of thrust during takeoff, allowing planes to lift off in half the normal distance. Pilots described the experience as being kicked into the sky by an invisible giant. The bottles burned for only a few seconds before being jettisoned, tumbling back to Earth as empty metal tubes. They were used extensively by both Allied and Axis forces on everything from fighters to heavy bombers. Aircraft taking off from cramped Pacific Island airstrips or frozen Russian fields relied on them when conditions made conventional takeoffs impossible. However, the rockets were expensive, single-use, and sometimes unreliable. If one failed to ignite while others fired, it could throw a plane off balance and cause crashes. After the war, improved engine technology made them less necessary, and they faded from common use. The trench knives with brass knuckles were designed for the brutal reality of close-quarters combat, where soldiers had no room to swing a rifle or fire a shot. The Mark I trench knife used by American forces featured a double-edged dagger blade and a handle formed from solid brass knuckles, turning every punch into a potentially lethal strike. Soldiers could stab, slash, or pummel enemy combatants in the tight confines of trenches, bunkers, and building-to-building street fighting. The weapon was deeply personal and terrifyingly effective in hand-to-hand combat. Its design harked back to World War I, but it saw renewed use in World War II during brutal Pacific Island battles and urban warfare in Europe. These knives were often customized by soldiers. Some soldiers sharpened the edges further or added personal markings. After the war, many were brought home as grim souvenirs, kept in attics and closets by veterans who rarely spoke about what they had done with them. The trench knife remains a stark reminder of war's most savage moments. The anti-tank dogs were one of the Soviet Union's most controversial weapons, born from desperation during the early years of the German invasion. Soviet trainers conditioned dogs to crawl under tanks by placing their food beneath stationary vehicles during training. The dogs learned to associate the underside of tanks with meals. In combat, they were fitted with explosives strapped to their backs and released toward advancing German armor. When a dog crawled beneath a tank, a wooden lever on the pack would trigger the detonation, destroying both the vehicle and the dog. The program was a disaster. Dogs often ran back towards Soviet lines because they had been trained using Soviet tanks that ran on diesel, while German tanks used gasoline and smelled different. Soldiers were forced to shoot their own dogs to prevent them from detonating in friendly positions. The ethical horror and battlefield failures led to the program's quiet cancellation, but not before hundreds of dogs were sacrificed in this grim experiment. The bouncing bombs were the ingenious invention of British engineer Barnes Wallis, designed specifically to destroy German dams that supplied water and hydroelectric power to the industrial Ruhr Valley. These cylindrical bombs were spun backward at high speed before being dropped from low-flying aircraft. Upon hitting the water, they skipped across the surface like flat stones, bouncing over defensive torpedo nets that protected the dams. When the bomb reached the dam wall, it sank and detonated at a precise depth, creating a shockwave that cracked the massive concrete structure from below. The famous Dam Busters raid in May 1943 used these bombs to breach the Mona and Eder dams, flooding factories and disrupting German war production. The mission required extraordinary precision flying at night, just 60 feet above the water, at exact speeds. The success of the bouncing bomb was a triumph of physics and courage, but the weapon was so specialized that it had no use beyond that single mission. It remains one of the most brilliant, yet narrowly focused innovations. The limpet mines were magnetic explosives designed to be attached underwater to the hulls of enemy ships by divers, commandos, or resistance fighters operating in occupied ports. Shaped like a flattened dome, these mines used powerful magnets to clamp onto steel ship hulls below the waterline where they could not be easily seen or removed. A timer would be set, giving the saboteur time to escape before the explosion ripped open the ship's hull, sinking it at dock or in harbor. British, American, and resistance forces used limpet mines extensively to destroy supply vessels, warships, and transport ships throughout the Mediterranean, Pacific, and European theaters. The Italian Navy famously used similar devices to cripple British battleships in Alexandria harbor. These mines were devastatingly effective. When placed correctly, they required nerves of steel and skilled swimmers willing to approach heavily guarded ships in the dark. After the war, navies developed better hull inspections and anti-sabotage measures, and the limpet mine faded from prominence as naval warfare shifted to different threats. If one of these forgotten weapons made you stop and think, tell us which one surprised you most in the comments, like the video, and subscribe for more unbelievable stories from World War II.